Hey everyone, I'm V. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado.ai. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss about privacy code scanning. If you're here, my assumption is either you are interested in privacy code scanning or you're working in a technology company where a lot of code is written, a lot of software is being written by your product managers and engineers and data engineers. And you're trying to understand how you can scan code with Privado or independently to build your maps. So in today's webinar, we're going to look at the platform. We also have some exciting updates over the last 6 months that we've done. So we're going to demonstrate those as well. So stay tuned. Um, Before we jump into the webinar itself, couple of housekeeping items. The session is being recorded, so in case you miss something, you want to revisit, we will send the recording of the webinar to everyone. There's also a Q&A. You will see a Q&A tab at the bottom. If at any point of time you get a question that you want me to answer on the product, on a certain offering, or in general, feel free to put it there. I'll be able to pick it up. We'll also have a dedicated Q&A section towards the end of the webinar. So we will cover anything that we missed there as well. So, and then there's a chat which everyone can see in case you want to chat with other fellow webinar people who are attending the webinar. With that, I guess we'll get started. So in today's agenda, we're going to first start with what's the key privacy challenge that is still not solved. GDPR came in 2016, 2018, went live, then came CPRA, then My Health, My Data, Colorado, and then every other state law is being passed. We also have LATAM, soon India, coming with its own comprehensive privacy law. So with all this flux in the regulation and all the technology, privacy technology being adopted by teams, privacy programs being built, what is still a big challenge, what is still a big gap, and why. So we're going to start right at the top from a strategic level of what the key privacy challenge is. And once we go in, we're going to introduce why privacy code scanning is important and how it can help you. We'll also look at the platform updates to Privado itself. We have some exciting functionalities to help privacy teams both save time and reduce risk. And finally, we'll also do a demo and Q&A. So you're going to see things live in action. Feel free to, again, put questions, stop me as we are going through the webinar. Perfect. So the fundamental problem we see, or when I talk to chief privacy officers, privacy professionals, is uh, it kind of manifests in multiple things, but it's usually either, hey, we put a lot of money in and our data maps are still manual. We still have to ask people on who we are sharing data with. So that's like one big bucket on visibility. We don't really know what's happening with data, and our data map itself is powered by an assessment. In order to get that data map up to date, we're running assessments every year, and that's leading to a lot of inefficiencies. The second big piece we hear from them is that they have this privacy by design program, which is run by privacy intake process. So they have privacy threshold assessment, privacy impact assessment, and data protection impact assessment. All of these end up are leading to a place where they're almost choking the product development lifecycle, where they're doing too many assessments. So it's not good for the business. It's not good for the privacy team. And finally, at the end of the day, they want to reach a shared accountability model where some of the privacy risk is co-owned by business, but there's no easy way to transfer that risk right now or have that accountability model. So when we speak to all of them, one of the key things that we see, one of the key missing gap we see is software, right? Left to right, if you see, or even the recent fines or enforcement by FTC, a lot of those fines actually originate in the software, be it because of a pixel misconfiguration or an SDK problem, where you need an SDK inventory and SDK data flows. All of that is not on the data side, but it's actually in the product or the software built by a software engineer. Also, if you look at the classic data map problem, which is you need to know your data, but for privacy, you need to know use of your data. That's where the inefficiencies start to begin with. So you might end up buying a data discovery tool to say, hey, I know I have a database which stores first name, last name, and email address. And maybe that's enough for protecting the data and data classification. But for privacy, you need to know the processing activity. You need to know the purpose. You need to know the use of data. And that's where you have to go back to the same person who discovered the data to say, can you tell us the use of this data? And for that, you have to send assessment one, assessment two, and assessment three. That's where a big inefficiency lies. But if you really think about it, what you're really trying to do is you have data in a database and you have the software which uses the data, which reads the data from a database for personalization, authentication, payment processing, order management, shipping. All these functionalities or features of your software are nothing but code written by an engineer. Of course, there was a product requirement document written by a product manager saying this is what I want, but ultimately it became part of your software. So instead of actually going to people and manually asking them, hey, what's your process? Why not go to software to give you the same answer? The software that your engineers have written, be it for your mobile app or website, or all the internal code that your users don't see, that has the logic of data collection, data sharing, data store, data use, all of that. That in itself is a processing activity. And by scanning that, you can actually automate all of this process. You can actually bring the last efficiency or the last automation in your privacy program. So moving on, like, how does this gap or how does this software gap manifest? It manifests in three buckets, as we were discussing: the visibility bucket, governance, and enablement. So visibility is straightforward. Basically, you go from a point where you have generated some level of data map or ROPA report, but it is super manual. It takes a lot of people to give you updates on that. You have to rely on humans, so it's not really accurate. And you have to run these assessments every year or else you fail an audit, right? So it takes a lot of time. It's very inefficient. The second is governance. Governance is where you have this privacy by design process where to get to a place where you have a risk register, you have to run assessments. And that's very inefficient because you already have data moving in through your software, but you have to rely on someone telling you how to get to the risk, right? The second problem is you can also lead to a place where every PIA can take a lot of time. And so then you have to make a choice of doing too many or too few. If you do too many assessments to reduce risk, then you are choking the business. If you do too few, then you're accepting the risk, right? So that's kind of this false choice that you have to make. So that's how it manifests into governance layer, because you're not looking at the software the way it is written. And finally, enablement. At the end of the day, the success of a security program was when engineers started owning the security outcomes, or a quality assurance program is the same. The people who are building the software are owning the outcome. Success of a privacy program is when the marketer who's responsible of adding a tag has the capability to see the impact and hence owns the outcome of adding a tag and not putting consent, or an engineer who's collecting data which is not supposed to be done, which is by mistake, gets the privacy impact of that and actually does not do it and asks you in the first place. So that's how the shared accountability problem comes in, is because a lot of other teams in your company are not empowered to see the privacy impact, and that's why we see this challenge. And that's kind of what Privado solves for. So Privado is a privacy code scanning solution. We'll scan the code of any software your engineers have built. So think about your user-facing digital experiences, right? Your website, your mobile app, your TV app, even like POS system, dashboards. And there is a lot of software which your users never interact with, but these are all the features, all the code that run the features of authentication, personalization. So we scan all of that. And once we have that, we basically supercharge privacy, make it at exactly the speed of your software development. So they are in tune, they are in sync. And we deliver three key outcomes. The first one is on the visibility side, where we take your data maps, which are static, which rely on people, to automatic and dynamic. You are able to see what data you collect, who you share it with, where you store it, and for what purpose. The second thing is we make your privacy by design or privacy governance programmatic. So currently, you have to rely on people telling you what they do with data to find the risk. Privado completely eliminates that and takes your policies and the law to say, this is what's happening with data. Based on that, here is the risk. So instead of spending time in discovering the risk, you can actually get to the risk faster and fix it. And finally, a key part is to integrate in tools of your business, right? Integrate with Jira, SCM tools where engineers spend time, integrate with Google Tag Manager where your marketers are spending time, and giving them clear guidance when they make a mistake. So enabling your engineers, data engineers, marketers, all of them. And the fundamental shift or the fundamental difference you will see in your privacy program by moving to a code scanning approach is, even if you're doing data discovery or you're relying on assessment, most of your time goes in data gathering, right? It's a big project. You have to do integration by integration, and that takes forever. So you have very little time on fixing the risk. You are spending all the time in finding the risk. In Privado, if you integrate with us, you can pretty much go live in under 3 days, run the scan and get all the visibility, get your risk out. And once you have that, you have the exact same 12 months remaining for fixing the risk, right? So you go from an approach where you're spending most time in building the map to spending very little time there, but most of the time in fixing the risk that comes out of that data mapping exercise. And finally, this is how the Privado platform functions. We integrate with your source code management tool. So think of this as applications where the entire code of your company is maintained, well version maintained. That's typically for cloud 5 minutes of integration time. If you go with our hosted solution, that's about 3 days in total, and then you are live. Nonetheless, once it just takes one integration, we run the scan, and then we first generate the data map. So you will know what data you collect, who you share it with, where you store it, and for what purpose. Once that's done, then we automatically generate privacy issues and privacy risk that you can drive down as well. So that's like an overview of the Privado platform, where you can start to think from, hey, what's the risk that I have in software, something that's mostly missing in privacy programs, to a place where you have complete visibility and risk reduction as well. Once that's done, again, going back to the three key gaps that we see on visibility, governance, and enablement, Privado will build your data map, automate your ROPAs. If you're doing privacy impact assessment on an application, automate that. And you move from a point where you are relying on word of mouth of people to tell you what they're doing, to a model which is zero trust privacy. I know in security, that's a big thing to have zero trust security. You can actually do the same for privacy because you're relying on actually written code, not on what people remember. The next thing what it will do is it will embed privacy in your development process. So think of any software change that goes live today. It goes through a series of security scanners to ensure you don't pass on a vulnerability in your product's life. The same thing happens for privacy. So privacy and security are on the same pedestal. If a new software change adds a pixel, adds a new data flow that doesn't comply with your public facing privacy promise, it will actually flag that and prevent it from going live. And finally, helping engineers, helping marketers as they make mistakes, we will actually tell them, hey, here is a privacy issue in your new software, and this is how you fix it. So they can actually go live faster. So this is kind of building that seat belt in your privacy program, building that guardrail where you can actually go fast because there is something which is checking on your behalf continuously. So with that, there are a bunch of new product updates that we're going to look at. But before we do that, I'm going to do a quick recap of the Privado platform, show all the capabilities. Then we're going to go back on the new product updates. And then from there, jump into each one of them and do a demo again. So as I'm doing that, as you get any questions, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll be happy to take them up as well. Oh, all right. I think someone mentioned the chat is disabled. So I'll ask someone on the Privado team to fix that up. Suhas, if you can do that. Perfect. Cool. So what I've done is I've integrated some open source code repositories to reflect some use cases around gaming, e-commerce, shopping, fintech. So a bunch of engineers create companies and products which are open source, which gives us advantage to demonstrate you how Privado would function in your company in a real life case or pretty simulated case. So to begin with, what we've done is we have discovered data elements, discovered some third parties, ran the scan across the company, and this is kind of our starting point. So the first real thing is you can go in. The and answer the first biggest question, which is what data do we have and what do we do with that data? That's typically the starting point of a privacy program. Every privacy policy has that, what data we collect and what we use it for. So to answer that question is really tough, because as it gets used in the company, as the company size grows, the use cases grow as well. So how do you do that? So in Privado, that's super simple. You start with our data inventory section, and you start with a list of data elements. So this is a section where you get the answer of what's the data that we are collecting, sharing, processing through all the software we've built, who we are sharing it with, and why. This is, by the way, a pre-configured list. You don't have to do any training for this. We have a list of 200 data elements that we are looking for that could be being collected or processed from your code. And every data element has a category, sensitivity. We also give you out of the box tags or classification tags. So for example, SSN is CPRA sensitive, whereas card number is PCI, and illness or medical condition is sensitive all the way through. And you can customize that. So everything can be in sync with your data dictionary. That's completely possible. Now, once we have this map of data elements that your company is processing in general, what you want to know is, for example, let's say if you're an e-commerce company and you process home address, you want to know who gets home address through your products. Answering that question is super easy in Privado. You can just come in here, click on this button, and it will build an account level data flow map saying address is being shared in this account with 10 third parties. Google Maps, Braintree Payments, Stripe, Sentry, some analytics system, Telium, which is a CDP, and some other tools. It also will tell you if address is being stored in a specific database. So this can help you in your DSAR request down the funnel or down the stream. It is also giving you actually some risk because it's being stored in cookies, which is not a great thing. And then it goes in application log. So this becomes like a more of a data security issue or a data minimization issue, but this is just an FYI in this case. If this was SSN and going to logs, then that would be a big problem. So focusing on the first big piece, which is where does address get shared externally? That's something that you want to disclose, especially if this one of these were an advertiser, right? So for example, if you want to know how does address get shared with Telium, it's super simple. It tells you the exact product which is doing that. And then from here, we can go to that specific product and see why, what's the reason and things like that. So that was just one example of looking at address and building that map. The other one could be, I know like email address is typically the core identifier around which DSAR is set up, and you want to know which third parties get email address. That's also super easy. In this, it's 39, actually 23 third parties. So it's a bigger list. We can just export it as well from here to get the same data out in a more tabular format. So that's an example where you're going into an account, running scan, let's say for one product and saying, show me what data we collect through this product and the data flows. The same thing is possible in third parties. So for example, this account, we have about 116 third parties that Privado has discovered. Now, one of the biggest challenges for privacy team is the third party sharing brings in a lot of risk because you end up doing an assessment and a contract at the start of the engagement. Over time, the integration changes and the data flows never are consistent with what was said in the assessment, right? So there's always this gap between what you assessed and what data actually gets shared, and that changes continuously. So how do you know exactly if you integrated Metapixel, you don't have a Metapixel breach like we had one in Europe today or in US since the last, 2 or 3 quarters? That's super easy to detect in Privado. You can just log in. It'll give you a list of all the third-party integration, and then you can go in and say, tell me what data Metapixel is getting, and it will give you generate a list. In this scenario, just for data elements, email address, device ID, order data, and advertising identifier. Now, if you are a company which could be selling any health-related items, for example, let's say if you're selling drugs through your e-commerce store, then sharing order data could also reveal health data. So this could be a problematic case, but if you're someone who doesn't have that risk in your order details, then that's something you can completely ignore as well. And Privado has some functionalities to set these policies up to generate that risk rating as well. But that's kind of what you're seeing here is what data goes to Facebook is super easy to see. Right now, at least in companies, there's a big push to do generative AI as a big push, saying, hey, we're going to integrate OpenAI, Anthropic, Cloud, our own models. And on the other side, from regulators, there is more transparency requirements. In EU AI Act, I know America, there is a legislation or regulation discussion happening at the same time. In Privado, you'll be able to detect both. So if any of your product is actually integrated with OpenAI, you can actually search for that. It will be listed here. And you can not only do that, you will also know what data gets shared. So for example, through this product, email vector DB, email address actually gets shared to OpenAI. And that's a visibility. If you are doing a generative AI project, or if that's being rolled out, you want to actually know what data goes in through a prompt or through your fields as well. And finally, from a data inventory perspective, the same thing is possible to get on a database level or on an API level. So just taking a step back, what Privado is initially building is giving you that data map, that visibility across an account without you asking a single question. This is all automatic. You don't have to do anything so far. Once you have that, then the next thing just on the visibility part is, hey, now I have all of this. I have a regulatory requirement to generate a ROPA report. How do I do that? So you can do that in Privado in a very easy way. One is you jump into a specific product of yours. For example, in this case, Privado Accounts API. And Privado pre-fills a ROPA report. So generally, the assessment automation component of privacy products is to take the answers and update the inventory. In Privado, we actually scan and pre-fill the same. So in this case, for example, this is how the ROPA report looks like. So if you're into Europe or if you're trying to do a PIA in the US side, Privado will actually pre-fill the toughest part of your PIA or ROPA report, which is the data inventory, what data you collect. And then the second is the data flows. Where does it get shared externally? Who gets access? Where does it get stored internally? Things like that. So this is where we will start to save about half of your time in completing a ROPA or a PIA. We have an exciting update regarding a GenAI tool for or functionality for ROPAs, which I'm going to talk next. But when an assessment like this goes in Privado to an engineer or a product owner, the biggest advantage here is generally you start with a clean slate saying, hey, tell us what data you process. And then the engineers or the product owners tell you, we don't process any PII. But in this case, and that's usually wrong, in this case, it starts the other way. You give them a list saying, hey, this is the data we know you are processing. That's why we are actually doing this assessment in the first place. And here's the proof. You can actually go in and see where Privado discovered last name, and they can confirm it, make it false positive. By the way, in some of our customer assessment, we would get a false positive like this, and they'll just say, an engineer could mark something like, we don't process uh, PII, just last name, right? And when you read this as a privacy professional, you can actually understand the gap that exists between how engineers think and how privacy teams think, and help and fix it, and then help improve your ROPA posture as well. So that's kind of the next big thing in Privado, is going from the early discovery to a regulator-friendly ROPA report or a PI, completing a PIA. We have assessment templates for that. And so that's giving you like visibility. The second part of the platform was risk reduction. How can you make your privacy by design or privacy governance more programmatic? In this case, what we do is we have an out of the box policy engine saying, hey, we have these things that happen and they carry risk, right? So let's start with a CPRA policy. So every company has a CPRA disclosure saying we are only going to share X data element outside. In Privado, we convert them into actual code checks. So for example, in this case, we have put in some data elements as the guardrail for CPRA policy. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare the Privado scan against this policy and say, do we violate this policy anywhere? And then we can go in and quickly filter by this policy for CPRA, and then start to kind of see that as well. Cool. Yeah. So if we go in here in this specific product, actually there are a bunch of products, but let's start from here where in this case, we saw email address is being shared with Facebook, but the disclosure really said they will only share online identifiers. And that's basically a risk, right? So typically, you would have to do a risk assessment to get to this risk. In Privado, the scan itself compares it to GDPR, your external policy, and say, hey, We already know this is a risk. We already know this is an issue. Just scan this and just actually fix this, and your risk goes down, right? And everything you see in Privado, these little code snippets, this is the translation between privacy policies and the engineer's work. So whenever you are telling engineers to fix something, everything has a line by line proof in Privado. So for example, user email gets transformed and goes to this line to Facebook. And that's why we're saying, hey, you're sharing email, please fix it. So the fix really is either you have to update your privacy policy, right? And start disclosing you will share email, or the engineer fixes it. In case the engineer or the product manager has to fix it, you can actually just send it to Jira to them and they will be able to pick it up. So that's really the second part of Privado platform, which is you can take Privado, you can take set up policies on whatever you're doing assessment against. All those risk questions you have in your assessment becomes policy in Privado. And then instead of asking people question, we will just compare the scan of what is written in your software against those policy and create the same issues. Another exciting part of Privado is having these policies for drift, wherein instead of basically manually relying on people to tell you when they make a change, Privado detects it. So think of a product like a mobile app. If someone adds an SDK, you typically want them to tell you. And then once they tell you, you want to assess it and make sure it's compliant, and then only it goes live. The problem is all these changes sometimes come to the privacy team, most times don't. So how do you pick that up? So Privado is a functionality where we compare, which is something called drift. We compare the change between the last scan and the new scan. And whenever we see a net new change, someone added a new SDK, someone added a new data flow, someone added a new third party, a data element, we create a privacy issue. And that's basically privacy by design for you. So for example, again, going back here, there are some example of that. So for example, in this case, someone added a new pixel for Facebook, and we actually picked it up saying, hey, we know you added this new pixel called facebook.net. You can see here, this was the code which was added. And this is, the guidance to the end engineer on what they need to do before they can go live, right? So think of privacy by design. We can convert all of that into code checks and then give engineers the guidance directly. They don't have to wait for it. So these are best privacy practices that you want them to do. But instead of waiting for them to tell you what they're doing and then giving them guidance, Privado just cuts that short. They, in their workflow, in which is kind of the last part where you want to give engineers guidance as they're making mistakes, Privado does the same. So as they make a mistake, Privado will in GitHub, which is where they spend time, give them a list of issues saying, hey, we discovered this new issue in your software. You have added a new third party, and we want you to go in and fill this privacy review before you can go live, right? So, and this is more of a checklist. So you're just confirming if they've signed a DPA, if they have a third party risk assessment done, if they forward DSR or deletion request. And this is really super configurable, which means whatever your privacy best practices, let's say if you have already created a plan for whenever someone adds an SDK, you want them to onboard it to your CMP, or you want to verify the data flows, whatever your ideal checklist is, we will deliver that checklist to the engineer and the product team as they make the mistake, as they make that change, and all of that will be completely governed from you. So you go from a place where you have less visibility to complete visibility. You can find risk without asking people a question, so you can reduce risk. So you don't have to spend time in building the risk register, but actually reducing it. And finally, you get fully integrated in your engineer's workflow, your marketer's workflow. And then what you're enabling them to do is get the risk in their eyes. So they share the risk. So they actually will reduce it as well. So that's how the Privado model kind of works. With that, there are a bunch of new functionalities that I want to show. I'm going to go back to the deck. I'm also going to look at for the Q&A that has already been added. And I know there's a bunch of comments, bunch of questions, and I'm going to answer those. Okay, perfect. So before we go into the new functionality, so there's a question around how do we identify the data elements itself? If the definition of variables in code is not clear, not common, does it affect the discovery? That's a great question. We have a couple of ways to do that. Let me take an example, and then I'll probably take an example of a health app. and then from there we will start. So let's look at this Android health app. Here we have discovered a data element called IoT or sensor data. In this case, really what we've done is we've mapped Android permission to data elements, right? So Bluetooth permission tagged to a data element. In another case, in this case, this is illness or medical condition. And we can see what all was tagged by Privado here. So drug is tagged by Privado, health condition is tagged by Privado, therapy taken is tagged by Privado, and pharmacy ID is tagged by Privado. So just to explain what we're doing is we're tagging these variables and objects, which is nothing but how an engineer writes code as they define these variables and classes. And what Privado does it ingests all of them together. And we have two levels of identification. One is a straightforward regex regular expression rule matching, which is saying that, hey, if you find something like health condition, match it to illness or medical condition. That's generally very precise. It opens up a lot of false positive and a lot of false negative, right? But it's very precise, which means like if in a company, you have a specific identifier, let's say Privado UID, which is like a general identifier you want, wherever you see that you want to tag it, you can use a regular expression to do that. So step one, tag them using regular expression. Step two, use our LLM, where what we're doing is we're taking all the context. So for example, this pharmacy ID is linked to drug name, drug quantity, drug category. So while pharmacy ID on its own will never match to a Privado rule, but because it's linked to all these variables, which are basically health data, it is called out as uh, illness or medical condition. Same is true for therapy taken. Therapy taken, we don't have a rule for that, but with context, that's where our AI engine is able to do that. So it's a combination of regular expression and machine learning, LLM as well, to tag that. And another interesting piece you will see is that when the data gets shared externally, because that was a point, like if the definitions are not right, will it affect discovery? You will see when data goes out, for example, in this line, the data which goes to Google Ads is parameters. We are not tagging parameters. We tagged pharmacy ID and we tracked the transformation, right? So even if you find it in one place, we are able to track it across the code to find the data flow. So that's kind of our innovation. So that was one question, and thanks for asking that. I know there's another one on the chat, which was around integration, right? So it was around um, can action be fired off to other system with Privado to help monitor? Okay, awesome. So there's one question around if there are, let's say, drift, which is your application changes, you start to collect more data. Other than Jira, what other integrations are possible that we can fire? So there are a couple of options available. One is directly source code tools. So this is where the engineer made the change and giving them guidance right there and then. So that's GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, all CI/CD tools as well. Another one is OneTrust, TrustArc, any of the classic privacy management tools, we can integrate there as well. And then we have APIs, in which case, if you have something which is very specific, you want to build your own, you can ingest that as well. Slack is available. We can send a Slack notification, email notification goes out, ServiceNow. So bunch of integrations to support that as well. Awesome. Keep the questions coming. I'm going to move to the second part of the product demo, which is what are our latest product updates. So we really worked on three key things in the last 6 months or so to enhance the platform. Some are on the visibility side, so processing activity discovery and tag manager integrations, CDP integration, and then the last one is more to help engineers do privacy better. So three things. The first functionality is when we generate a ROPA of going up from software. One of the key questions were, hey, when we have to create it for a regulator, it has to be more feature driven. It has to be more simpler. It has to be the format of a processing activity. So Privado invested in that, and we actually leverage now generative AI to scan the code and discover all the data flows that was always there, but also then take that and convert into regulator friendly, privacy team friendly feature or processing activities. And then that can power your ROPA. So this can now directly be attached to a ROPA report. And then, it is linked to the source of truth, how software is written, but also linked in terms of what the functionality is. So I'm going to show you that. It is editable. It is driven by our fine-tuned model. So it's all we're not making any calls to OpenAI. It's all in-house, so no code leaves outside as well. That's number one. The next thing is a big risk that we saw over the last 6 months where FTC fined companies were through CDPs and tag managers. So what really happens is when user starts to use your website, you will use something like a Google Tag Manager, and Tag Manager will introduce more third parties. A lot of data flows start from your website to Tag Manager, and from Tag Manager to pixels like TikTok, Snapchat, so on and so forth. The same is true for customer data platform. So customer data platform could be Segment, High Touch, Rudder Stack, a lot of, or your own, right? You might have your own customer data platform where you're ingesting all the data and then that data is transformed and then shared externally. A big visibility gap is this is all for growth and marketing. For privacy team is sometimes you end up accidentally sharing more data with advertisers, and that leads to fine. Sometimes the consent is not honored, that leads to fine. And you just don't have the visibility of third party sharing data with more third parties. So we actually solved for that. We always had the visibility of data going from your website and mobile app to tag managers and CDPs, but now we've done integration with Google Tag Managers and others to further extend it. So we can show you the end-to-end data flow. So we're going to talk about that. And the last update is this is really for your engineers. Apple had like an update last year to now you have to put in Apple Privacy Manifest report as part of your Apple, I think it's not called an APK, but your Apple code. And you can generate this in Privado, send it to your Apple engineers. It's already pre-filled and it generates a format that your engineers can directly upload. So we're going to look at that. And with that, I'll move back to the demo. I know there are a couple of questions that I'm going to uh, answer as well. Perfect. Cool. So let's start with the first part, which is generating these processing activity, right? So let's take an example of this application called loan application backend. So again, this is classic backend service serving some bank or banking core application. We've done the scan, we've shown you the regular stuff, but if you guys scroll down, you will see the processing activities that Privado generated. So there are three key features that this software is offering. One is customer management. So it basically allows you to add, update, and fetch customer information, including login and sign up. The second is managing the loan application itself, where it is taking in customer ID, and it's actually retrieving a loan by that, foreclosing a loan, and also taking in loan application. And finally, it sends email. I know there was a question around data leak via emails. Privado can detect data flows where data is being shared via an email partner like SendGrid, or alternatively through your SMTP SES, however. So yeah, that's the third. So this basically becomes the first part of your processing activity. You already had the data transfer, you already had the data categories, third parties. Now you also have processing activities. How our customers have been using it is uh, sometimes they use it and attach it to a ROPA. Sometimes they just use it to learn what's happening inside a repository. What happens is like these code repositories are not intuitively named. In our case, in our company, my CTO actually named it using galaxies. So, you'll have a repository named Andromeda. No privacy person can figure what that is. But with this functionality, it will convert it into very legal friendly, very simple processing activities that can be used to power a ROPA report and also get a sense of what are we really doing here, right? So that was one example of that. And then we can take like more examples and it will basically give you the same sense uh, of what we are really doing, right? So if we take Privado Analytics, that's okay, there's no processing activity here, but accounts API. This one is for user account management, pretty clear from the name itself. So it's all generated, it's not fixed, it's not one-to-one mapped. Um, Going back on what data do we use for it, or what's the privacy concern here? So we do not use any third-party AI model for it. It's a fine-tuned large language model that we host, so no code goes outside. We do not use any of our customer code for any of our training. We use permissive open source code for that, and everything is localized to an account, so nothing goes out as well. So um, this functionality or overall any AI functionality in Privado, we never use any customer data for that. Luckily, there is a lot of big code available on GitHub, which is permissible that we can use under the right licenses to train our models and then, give that value back to our customers. Um, Awesome. Perfect. So that was the first functionality, which is how do we go from code scan to ROPAs and processing activities. The next one really was CDP integration and GTM integration. So I'm going to use Google Tag Manager as an example. So again, think of Google Tag Manager. It'll be integrated in your websites. And what would happen is people will add more tags and your consent will break, your data flows will happen, and then you will not have visibility into what third parties sit in Google Tag Manager. And that's very dynamic. Any marketer can change it. So in Privado, what will happen is we will generate a list of, for example, in our account, all the tags and pixels we put on our website through tag managers, and it will actually give you the list, and then you can actually click and see how. So for example, there's this LinkedIn pixel. It's actually telling you we have actually these many LinkedIn pixel for visit tracking, uh, custom page, right? And then it will also verify if the consent is broken, but it's giving you the exact name of the tag and how, right? Um, what else? Like intercom, very popularly used. That's another tag that Privado discovered, right? So think of Privado where on the code we are finding data flow from your website to tag manager. And if there was any of these repositories were our website repository, we would have told you data going from uh, the website to tag manager to the third party as well. So that's how the second big functionality works, which is around tag manager. And finally, the last bit was around Apple Privacy Manifest. So in case your Apple engineers are trying to build that, or you are in conversation, your app has been rejected, one of the reasons have been Apple Privacy Manifest. Privado automates that. We have a pre-generated assessment template for that where you can go in and we will generate all the sections which are mandatory in the Apple Privacy Manifest report. So for example, data elements, it's already pre-filled. Third parties is pre-filled. There is this thing called required reason API in this manifest, which we detect. That's usually the reason for why people's app get rejected. So I'm going to confirm this. Once this section is reviewed by your Apple engineers, all they need to do is give the reasons. So why are we using user default API? What is the purpose? We also pre-fill this in some cases. So, and once all of this is filled in, I'm just going to quickly do that. This section was already filled. Your assessment is done, and you can actually just download the file. And the file is in the format that you can just take in and update it, right? And what would happen in the future, these Apple Privacy Manifest requirements will change, or you will add another SDK. Privado will pick it up, update it, and this will actually help your engineering team more than the privacy team because their app will not get rejected because they're using this functionality. So yeah, I think a lot of privacy work can be done where you get the privacy benefit, but by helping engineers as well. Yeah, and then there's another question, which is kind of around mobile app. So I'm going to go back and double down on that. But with that, we complete the platform update. And then so feel free to add any questions. I know there are a bunch of questions that I want to go through. The first one is around mobile app. And the question is, do we also recognize a web viewer when responsive web code is added versus SDK? And their adherence to app tracking transparency. So yeah, great question. We actually do that via two ways. So and that's the same problem we face in websites as well, wherein you have some direct JavaScript that someone can add, and then that JavaScript can add more. Similarly, you can have a web view where that you can have a lot of problems going in the web view. So Privado can do both. It will detect the web code, it will detect the SDKs, it will detect the data flows, and if the consent flow is working well. But we also have a dynamic scanner for website and mobile apps as well, where we can simulate the mobile app experience and say, hey, you're not adhering with the with the app tracking transparency, or your GDPR consent banner is not working. So we have workflows where statically we're from code scan, we're able to verify that. And for the edge cases where things are very dynamic, which happens in website and mobile app because of the way the ecosystem is, we use our dynamic scanning where we simulate the mobile app, simulate the website to give you the same experience. So yeah, that is a use case that we can do in Privado as well. Um, Thanks for asking that. Let me just answer that. Okay, awesome. So there's another question around when someone introduces Privado in a company, what is the is the use case around visibility or around privacy by design? Okay, great question. So yeah, I would wish it was more privacy by design to begin with, but for most companies, the typical use case that they buy Privado for is to get the visibility, wherein they've spent some time in getting that data map of the software. And sometimes it's very restrictive where they want to only scan for marketing governance. So they have a list of 10 or 20 repositories, mobile app, website, their CDP repositories, anything their growth team is working on, they're scanning that to say, show us the data flow diagrams, help us figure out if we are accidentally sharing more data. On the European side, it's like, let's scan everything and start to build ROPA report. Once it's done and the high risk applications are discovered, then the phase two starts where they start to switch on all these policies to say, okay, now we want to make sure if in this product we ever introduce a new SDK, we create an issue and we have clear workflows. Also, by that time, they've trained the engineers by sending assessments through Privado. So that's how typically the rollout looks. You go in, integrate in 5 minutes, or in case of it's on-prem couple of days, you get the visibility, then you start putting in guardrails, and then finally you start helping engineers by giving them feedback continuously. Awesome. Perfect. Thanks for asking that question as well. So we're just going to wrap up in the next couple of minutes. So if there are any more questions, feel free to add them here. I have one last question that I can see, which is around ad tech governance and around SDK audit specifically. The question really is, with the recent FTC fine around and the guidance around building SDK governance, how can Privado help us doing that, or how do you help your current customers? So yeah, that's one of actually the main utilities or the main use of Privado, wherein for any repository, but in this case, we're going to focus on mobile app. Once you run a scan in Privado, so I'm going to take the same example of Leaky Health app. Privado will generate an SDK report. So it will basically tell you, build this nice data flow diagram saying these are all SDKs or APIs integrated. We actually discovered both. But in the case of the FTC guidance, it was more focused on SDKs. So this is the SDKs that Privado discovered. Firebase, AdMob, Facebook, Mixpanel, Branch, all of them. And not just that, because this is, like some other tools can still give you the name. The main utility of Privado is giving you the SDKs, and then for each SDK, telling you what the data flow is today. So what are you sharing with AdMob? In this case, health data, which is problematic, and also tracking it over time. So tomorrow, if someone adds an SDK, like for example, in this case, someone is trying to add apps flyer for the first time, and this is not yet live, Privado will tell that to the engineer saying, hey, we noticed that you're adding a new third party. So that's the governance part, right? There's the inventory, which on the initial scan you will get. And then the second piece really is governance, which is when things change, Privado is able to capture that, saying, hey, you're adding this new SDK and we want you to do ABC things. We want you to fill this SDK audit, right? Are you using this SDK or not? Yes. So confirm that. And if yes, then have you completed the assessment? If yes, what's the link? And this is just a general guidance. This could be anything really. So yeah, that's how the SDK governance use case can be taken care in Privado. You get the inventory, which is the list today, and you get governance and control by moving to privacy issues and detecting new SDK addition as well. Yeah, so that was the last question. Thanks everyone for joining in and attending our webinar. We'll be sending the recording, and if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to us later. Thank you. Bye-bye.